Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Khosroo, for your insightful and very informative statement, mostly on Trump's exceptional unilateral policy and GCPOA, as well as Biden's short and long-term challenges in three key areas: Europe, Persian Gulf, Middle East as well, and East Asia. I am sure our respective audience will have additional curiosity regarding our topic and your views and observations. However, before that, we have to move on with our second presentation. And our second panelist is Professor Dato, Dr. Rashila Ramli. She has a PhD in political science from Northern Arizona University. She is currently principal fellow. She's currently principal fellow, professor of political science, and former director at the Institute of Malaysian and International Studies, University Kebangsaan Malaysia, UKM. Her areas of specializations are political development, gender, politics, and human security. Her current research is on global ASEAN, promoting social inclusion through SDGs and public policies in Malaysia and Africa, and governance of the South China Sea. She is also researching on localizing SDGs in 10 parliamentary areas across Malaysia. Her professional commitment includes serving as president of the Malaysian Social Science Association and member of the Council of Security Cooperation in Asia Pacific. She is also the Assistant Secretary General of the National Council for Women's Organizations and co-chair of the UN SDG Academic Network. Professor Dato Dr. Rashila, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Emir. Thank you for having me here today to IRF and to my other fellow panelists. It's an honor actually to be on the same panel with both of you. And of course to all the participants. Well, we have here about 50 participants. I'm sure there are a lot more online listening to us today. Yeah. So yeah, the topic on will there be any change in US foreign policy? And what I have done is I've got some slides right there, and I think Rizu will actually help me with the slides. Okay, I've divided it into a few points that I would like to address in the next 20 minutes. So we move on. So the points of discussion that I would like to touch on, the pillars of US foreign policy, and to see whether, which part of these pillars that might change a bit or it might not. The idea on liberal internationalism versus populist nationalism, which is basically dealing with America first, as well as a more multilateral approach. What was mentioned by Ambassador just now, the multilateral versus the unilateral. Regional changes, I will touch on a few. You can call Middle East, but from our perspective here in Malaysia, the region is also known as West Asia and Europe. And closer to home, whether there'll be some changes in especially with regards to China and Southeast Asia, the Straits of Malacca, and also our within ASEAN itself. And I will have a short conclusion right after that. So with that, we move on. So as we all know, the US election on 3rd November was a drawn-out process where at that point, Vice President Biden, who is now the President-elect Biden, has been declared the victor, where you can see with 81.3 million votes won by Biden. But at the same time, we know that the difference was only about 7 million between the two, and claiming 302 seats of electoral vote. Definitely, there will be implication in both the domestic and international front. And of course, the focus here is on the international front that we're going to address today as in our webinar. We move on. Okay, there are 4 pillars of US foreign policy, basically. Number 1, we're looking at global leadership, promotion of liberal international order, promotion of democracy and human rights, and prevention of regional hegemons. So these are generally 4 pillars that is being used. So we move on. A little elaboration on the pillars. With regards to the global leadership, this is about extensive involvement through global governance, playing the role of sometimes what is called as world policeman, more of a multilateral approach, deep engagement, where US will tend to want to frame international issues, and also the issue of providing global public goods. So these are the things that we tend to discuss when we talk about global leadership. Further to that, in the second pillar, promoting international order through rules based on international, based on international laws. There, you can say laws. We're looking at organizations such as WTO, WHO, and of course the United Nations itself. The treatment of international commons. We're looking at the oceans, for example, the outer space. We're looking at now issues of cyberspace. So this may be more of a global commons, and all of this needs to be taken into consideration. Of course, the respect for international law within these 2 pillars. Okay, we move on. The other 2 pillars deals with promotion of democracy and human rights, with the assumption that if governments are more responsive to their people, then they are less likely to go to war. The democratic peace theory, basically, this comes through with that. And through the 70 years, America has been trying to promote this, and to some extent it has worked, but to other extents, it may actually cause tension in different ways, especially in the 4th pillar, prevention of regional hegemony through security partnership at regional level, sometimes to the point of supporting non-democratic regimes. So because of that, it actually caused a lot of tension with the 3rd pillar, if you look at these 2. So with such pillars guiding the American foreign policy, we move on to look at the direction of US foreign policy. Now, this is where you have, as mentioned by Ambassador just now, multilateralism, and on the other side, more of a unilateralism. In other words that we can use or perspective, liberal internationalism versus populist nationalism, within the 2. So this is going to be a tussle that is going to occur in the foreign policy that both President-elect Biden as well as Kamala Harris have inherited as they move on towards governing the US from January 20th onwards. So the difference between the 2, so we will move on. Next slide, please. So basically, is it to continue playing an active role within the international arena, similar to the role played for 70 years prior to Trump's presidency, or to play a more restrained role at the international level? Is it to put America first? Is it to foreground more of national security? Is it to stay insular in its approach? So you can see within those 2, there's got to be a balance somewhere, and this is where the choices would have to be made by both, by the President-elect Biden. And if you look at the regional impacts, okay, 10 minutes. Okay, if you look at the regional impacts, we move on. Within Europe itself, we know that Europe is the biggest trading partner of the US. You know, there are new shipping technologies, new global institutions after the original, after the Second World War. So you have WTO, which has been moving, but there has been a lot of problem with it too. And I think in the recent election of the chairperson of WTO, US did not want to have the person involved, but instead was, I think, going for South Korea at that point. There is definitely damaged relations with NATO. No, we're not done yet. Okay, all members actually need to contribute at least 2% of their GDP on defense, and only 10 actually out of 30 members meet this commitment. And Germany actually, which is the biggest, actually committed only 1.3% of its GDP. So to some extent, when Trump came in, this was a big issue where he wanted to lessen Americans' commitment and wanted other members to be more proactive or not as complacent in looking after their own welfares. So to some extent, this may have brought changes. They may not be welcomed by the members of NATO, but at the same time, this actually asks members of NATO to be more proactive in their approach to managing the organization. Within China, it is really about the personality of the leaders. The personality of the leaders are important. Maverick style of both Trump and Xi Jinping both tried to outdo one another, I would say. Lots of tension in bilateral negotiations. Trump acknowledged that he actually received a beautiful letter. We don't know what the content is. Maybe it is out there. In 2018, the words that Trump would use would be a very simple word, so to speak, but he has a certain level of vocab right there. So lack of US leadership in Asia actually in this way allows China to take advantage through the Belt and Road Initiative. And we can see that there are a lot more engagement of even ASEAN member states with China at more of a bilateral level, especially the Philippines, even Malaysia itself. Okay, so you can see that the kind of vacuum that China, the US has left in the Asia region has brought forth China's more of a dominant role, has played a more dominant role in Asia. Okay, now we move on. Okay, in Southeast Asia itself, there was this put forth the free and open Indo-Pacific order. US is not as concerned on the strategic interest in Southeast Asia, at least during these 4 years, it has not played as much role. But actually that has allowed or forced in a way ASEAN to work closer together. And as I said earlier, we saw Philippines and also China moving closer to China, moving closer to China in a lot of its dealings. Yeah. In the West Asia or Middle East, we saw the withdrawal of troops from Syria in October 19. There was the withdrawal from the Iranian nuclear agreement. There was a forged greater relations with Israel, and definitely, as mentioned by Ambassador Osud, could not rely on NATO to work with US on West Asia. So to what significance is this going to continue under the new administration? So we move on. So under Biden-Harris for 2021 to 2024, this was the term, the phrase that has been used. We will lead by example of our power. We will not lead, I missed that. We will not lead by the example of our power, but by the power of our example. So we want to see whether this is something that is going to be carried through in the next 4 years. We move on. So in Biden's foreign policy speech, there were 3 major themes that were brought out. Reinvigorate our the democracy and strengthen the coalition of democracies that stand with us. So this is the keyword that is being used. Equip our people. So this is from Biden's perspective. Equip our people to succeed in a global economy with a foreign policy for the middle class. So he's really trying to pay attention to the domestic part of things, because the domestic issues will play a lot in the next, at least within his first 100 days in managing the country, to renew American leadership, American leadership to mobilize global action to go instead of global threat. Yeah, so you're looking at all this kind of themes brought out by Biden in his foreign policy speech. Now with that, if you look into the next slide, the argument, whether you're going to go multilateral or unilateral, or whether you're going to go liberal internationalism versus populist nationalism, there are long-standing benefits in preventing war between major powers, and the fact that there are rapid changes in communications, transports, and military technologies which require agile engagement. This is more for liberal internationalism, whereas those 70 odd million who agreed with who voted for Trump would probably favor more towards domestic politics, a greater reliance on unilateralism, even skeptical views on the value of alliances. They will bring forth argument on elevation in bilateral trade balances instead, and the cost underestimated while benefits has been overestimated. So these are arguments that we will see being played out, already being played out, and will be played out even more in the next couple of months, at least from January onwards, okay, in order to see what kind of policy that might come through in the long run. Yep. So what I've done basically is to kind of put a matrix up here, possible regional focus in the 4 areas with the 4 pillars. Where might the attention be given? All the pillars will be there. The pillars are not going to go away. However, what might be foregrounded in the different areas? Maybe within under global leadership, attention will be given more towards Europe, China, and Southeast Asia. Under the political liberal order, maybe more towards Europe. Under the democracy, human rights, I think this will be played out more with China. And then under regional hegemon, maybe that might be with the Middle East. So we shall see how this works out. So probable action dimension for Europe, more political, China, more economy, Southeast Asia, to some extent, security, not so much economy, but with West Asia, both security and also political. At the global level, yes, the re-engagement by the Paris Agreement to reverse the withdrawal from WHO, which should occur on July 1st, 2021, and definitely COVID-19 priorities, both domestically and internationally. That will be something that we all have to live with for at least another year. Vaccine or no vaccine, whatever in terms of the distribution and so on, this will be the issue that will be coming up in the next few months. Yeah. So we move on. I just have a couple more slides right there. Yeah, just to touch a bit on Malaysia itself. Malaysia, actually, we've had a pretty good relationship with the US throughout the years, but with Trump, it has been described as rather lukewarm. It was actually adversely impacted when Trump's administration did block the palm oil imports, and Malaysia was not included in the visit by the State Secretary to Asia Pacific. On the other hand, as I said, Malaysia is the 25th, we've had a long relationship. Malaysia is the 25th largest export destination for the US, whereas the US is the 3rd largest export. And there will be the continuation of the comprehensive partnership under Obama pivot to Asia. We can discuss this further under the Q&A later, okay? And lastly, as a conclusion, the US foreign policy, I think, will lean more towards the liberal internationalism, while Biden would have to accommodate to populist nationalism because there is a big dividing fork in the country. Yeah, greater attention to protection of global commons. This will take into account with regards to climate change and international passageways. So dealing with pillar 1 and 2, and at the regional level, such as in West Asia, concentration may lean towards more of pillar 3 and 4. And we're looking at about balance of power also in the region, yeah, with Russia playing a role now, especially in Syria and whatnot. So we're looking at those kind of a situation. So with that, I think I will conclude my presentation at this point, so we can discuss further under the Q&A. Thank you very much.